Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome all of you to a very special live stream today regarding not just the topic, but also the guest that we have. We have actually with us our dear brother Alex Blagojevic, and we are so excited to have him back. But the guest that we are introducing to you today to talk about a very important topic and a very timely one known as socialism is a very distinguished author by the name of William Federer or Bill Federer. So we are going, of course, to let Alex introduce him formally to us, and then we are going to ask him to highlight a book among many other books that he wrote. This particular book deals with this topic, but we're going to have a free flow discussion concerning socialism. And of course, if you are not affiliated with politics in the US recently, you probably will miss out on why we are choosing a topic like this, since it's becoming more and more prominent discussions, especially among young generations. But sadly, many people are unaware of the risk or the danger to democracy when it comes to thinking that socialism is the solution to certain economical problems or social problems. But I will wait until we start our discussions. With that in mind, I want to welcome all of you who are joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you so much, as always. We are blessed to have you, and thank you to our moderators. And we appreciate, of course, any of you, if you have a specific question, keep the questions focused on this particular topic, which is socialism, as much as possible. And let us know if you want this question to be directed to our guest, or is it just a generic one? Again, thank you so much. Alex, I'll turn it over to you, brother.
Thank you, brother Al. Happy to be back. And we're very, very privileged and honored to have Bill Federer, who's not only a dear friend and dear brother in Christ, but also, in my opinion, the best historian out there. And I'll tell you why. Not because he's a friend, but I met Bill many years ago at a National Conference on Apologetics in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he was a speaker, and I was blown away. And at the time, as you know, my field of studies is Islam, and Bill had written one of his 20 books is called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. And his book was just so fascinating. I learned so much reading it and listening to him. And he's a fabulous speaker. And be ready, fasten your seatbelt, because the information that's going to be coming at you is just incredible. And Bill has recently written, and I hope we have him back to talk about all the books, different books he's had. But he's a national speaker, a writer. He has a daily program called the Faith in History, and also a radio show called The American Minute. And he's written, like I said, 20 books, and he's been on all the channels, whether it's radio or TV or newspapers. He's been on Fox News, on CNN, C-SPAN, MSNBC, Hannity, O'Reilly Show, NPR, and I mean, the list goes on. If I just did this introduction, we would not have enough time to talk about his book. And he was also in the New York Times and Washington Times and Washington Post, and all of this. He's just an amazing human being. Not only is he an incredible historian. See, the thing I like about Bill is when I read him or I listen to him, he gives me the ideas that I'm interested in, but from a historical perspective, which is amazing, because I'm a history buff, but I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as Bill. So he puts it into an historical perspective, which is amazing. So today we're going to talk about his newest book called Socialism, from Plato to the present, and how the deep state capitalizes on crises to consolidate control. So, Bill, welcome. Thanks for being with us. We're just so excited. So, if you take over and go ahead, you have as much time as you want.
Oh, Alex and Al, great to be with you. And I'm humbled and honored to be a part of the program today. And feel free to interject at any time. I have lots of information and can go on. So if the book, I decided, would go back to the beginning of the concept of socialism, of everybody owning everything in common. And it's Plato. He lived 380 BC in Athens, and he writes in passing of Atlantis, this highly structured civilization on an island in the Mediterranean that sinks in the sea. Now, whether it existed or not, he thought that it did. And there is an island in the Mediterranean called Santorini. I had the chance to visit it decades ago, but it's what's left of a volcano, and it would have sent a tsunami all across the Mediterranean. Whether that's it or not, Plato considered Atlantis the ideal structured society, and he considered democracy an unstructured society. Demos means people, Krasi means rule, and in the city-state of Athens, the people ruled. It was great. And the chief characteristic of a democracy is tolerance. And then they learn how to tolerate people that are a little bit off. And then they tolerate people that are a lot off. To finally, they're tolerating lawlessness and chaos and fighting and crime in the streets and fraud, and nobody does anything about it. And this lawlessness turns into people feeling insecure and wanting someone to come along and restore order. And so they want someone to fix this unstructured mess. Well, along comes a governor and he says, I can fix it. I just need some emergency powers. Just temporarily, just going to take the powers to fix it. Then I promise to give them back. And Plato says, last of all comes the tyrant. When he first appears above ground, he is a protector. He's full of smiles. I'm going to take away your rights and freedoms, but I'm doing this to protect you. And then if any are suspected of resistance to his authority, he'll have a good pretext for destroying them. And then finally, the protector standing up in the chariot of state with the reins in his hand, a tyrant absolute. And then having a mob entirely at his disposal. He's not restrained from shedding of blood. So he sends out this mob to destroy his political opponents. And so this is the concept that Plato says, that the people ruling themselves, a democracy, they're going to tolerate each other, tolerate those that are a little bit off, tolerating lawlessness and chaos, and the people want someone to fix it. And the rubber band snaps back and they get this tyrant king. Now, Plato says that democracy is doomed to fail because it's based on the people having virtue. And if you give people a choice of giving up their life or giving up their virtue, they'll always give up their virtue to save their life. And he even said if someone was born that truly had virtue, the world would crucify him. So this is what he writes, 380 BC. If a truly just man lived, let him die as he lived. I might add that the just man will be scourged, racked, bound, and will at last be crucified. I thought that was fascinating that he would say that 380 years before Christ. And so he said that since the people really don't have virtue, the best you can hope for is a nice tyrant. He called them a philosopher king. And he will institute structure. And he's the head of gold, and his administrators and military are the arms and chest of silver. Together they make up the ruling class. They're going to impose this structure. And everyone else is the abdomen of iron and bronze. They are the ruled class. So socialism, all the way back to Plato, is a structured society of a ruling class and a ruled class. And the ruling class are above the law. They're politically connected. They're supported by the commoners. They can do special things like getting their hair styled when nobody else can. I just thought that was interesting that there was Nancy Pelosi had her hairstyle when everybody else was locked down in San Francisco. The ruled class, yes, everyone is provided for, but no one owns any property. There are no families. The government decides who gets to have children, and the government takes the children away from the parents, and the children are socialized. And this is a process of bringing them into the schools and getting them to forget their own family beliefs and learning how to serve the ruling class. And Plato explained that this philosopher king tyrant will set in order their own city. Right? When these true philosopher kings are born in a state, they'll set in order their own city. They will take possession of the children who will be unaffected by the habits of their parents. These they will train in their own habits and laws. And these children will be taught lies, noble lies. And Plato said, we want one single grand lie which will be believed by everybody. So the thought is, could you imagine the government taking the kids away from the families and teaching them lies? Now, that was Plato, 380 BC. In my book on socialism, I talk about how he inspired a couple thousand years later someone named Thomas More, Sir Thomas More, and he lived during the reign of Henry VIII. And he just 20 years after Columbus discovered America, and he writes a book where he calls it The Island of Utopia. And it's basically modeled after the island of Atlantis. And he's, in a sense, writing it as a veiled criticism of Henry VIII wanting to control everybody with the ruling class and the rule class. So on this island of Utopia, it's written as a Greek dialogue, a conversation. That's the way Plato writes. And the person that they're doing the dialogue with is Hythlodeus, which means peddler of nonsense. And the island of Utopia, the word utopia means nowhere. It's a fictitious island off the coast of South America, supposedly discovered by Amerigo Vespucci. And anyway, on this island of nowhere, told to us by this peddler of nonsense, everyone owns everything in common. Well, it sounds nice, except for the ruling class. And they track everybody everywhere they go. And everyone lives in identical 3-story houses with no locks on any doors. And the government provides everyone's health care. The government determines everyone's careers. The government takes away all their weapons. And it's all structured. It's all organized. You can't do anything other than what you're told your whole life. And you're tracked with an internal passport. And if you're caught without it, it's a lifetime of slavery. So, so why is that important? This was around the time that the Pilgrims were settling Massachusetts, and they had bylaws that said everything was owned in common. Everything got by cooking, trading, fishing, hunting shall go into ye common stock, and everyone's livelihood shall come out of ye common stock. And then at the end of a certain number of years, what's left would be divided equally. And William Bradford, the governor of the Pilgrims, said nobody wanted to work. The young man objected to doing twice as much work as the old guy, but got paid the same. The old guy objected to being classed in labor with the young guy. And the women objected to having to wash other men's clothes. And after a couple of years of almost starving to death, William Bradford said they basically scrapped it and gave everyone their own plot of land. This made all hands more industrious. The women now went willingly into the field to plant corn, while before they would allege weakness and inability, and to have forced them would have been considered great oppression. So this idea of owning everything in common, it actually was made fun of in a satire called Gulliver's Travels. And Jonathan Swift wrote it, where this Gulliver's washed up on the Lilliput Island, and everything's owned, right? It's a ruling class and a ruled class, and the government decides everything, and the commoners have all their stuff, owned in common, and their fates determined by the state. And so we see that democracies and republics are where you take the power of the king and give it to the people. But what if the king wants the power back? So socialism is basically a sales pitch to take power away from the people and reconcentrate it back into the hands of a dictator. I ask people, what if older fish could tell younger fish to stay away from shiny things dangling in the water, like a fishing lure? They can't. So every new generation of younger fish are attracted to the fishing lure. Socialism is a shiny thing dangling in the water. Free food, free clothes, free education. Free is attractive, but there's a hook there. And so you can't just take away an individual's rights and freedoms. They'll fight you for it. So you have to get them to give it away one of two ways. And the first way that you get people to give up their freedoms is you get them into fear, and then they will trade freedom for security. And the second way is you give them free stuff. And that's where the fishing lure dangling in the water, where it looks like it's free food just floating there for the taking, but there's a hook there. So how do you take power from people and reconcentrate it back into the hands of a dictator? Fear and free stuff. I thought there's some scriptures. One, it says, the fear of man bringeth a snare. And then it says in James, but every man is tempted, he's drawn away by his own lusts and enticed. So you want that that free stuff. A drug dealer can take over a neighborhood two ways. He can come in with guns and shoot, and people get in fear and agree to submit to the mob and pay extortion protection money, or he can give away free drugs and get everybody hooked. Once they're hooked, he can say, oh, you want more drugs? You've got to sell yourself into prostitution or rob from your neighbor. A hunter catches animals with guns or bait, right? So there's the positive and the negative. So socialism can take over with tanks coming in, or you bankrupt the country into dependency on the government. And how do you bankrupt the country into dependency? People that are on fixed incomes, if you have the government print lots and lots and lots of money, economics 101, you have more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, the price of those goods is going to go up. But people on fixed income, they're not getting more coming in. And so it's just making prices more expensive. At some point, they're going to not have enough money to live on. The government say, we'll help. First thing we'll do is we'll take all your 401k retirement, and then we'll just put you all on welfare. And then finally they'll just say, look, we're just going to put all the seniors on welfare and everybody unemployed on welfare. And then they're going to say, oh, you want to continue to get these welfare checks? You're going to have to get a shot. You're going to have to get 2 shots. You're going to have to get 3 shots. Every year you're going to have to get shots. You're going to have a vaccine passport. You can't do that. And they're going to have all these requirements for you to continue to getting the drugs or the free stuff. And so you backdoor people into dependency. So in other words, you can come in the front door with a gun or go around the back door and get them dependent. Those are 2 ways that you get people to give up their freedoms. As the free stuff aspect, I heard an interesting example, and that's how you catch wild pigs. If you try to chase them down, they're pretty big, but if you put a post in the ground and then throw some corn down, they'll come and eat the corn and sort of ignore the post. And then the next day you put in a second post, and the next day a third, and you keep throwing the corn down. And then you start putting in your screen, fencing in between them. And then the next day a little more, and then you keep throwing the corn down. They keep coming and eating the corn. They're sort of ignoring the fact that this is turning into a semicircle and then turning into a almost circle. And then finally there's only a little space that they can squeeze through. And they go in, they eat the corn, and then they go out. But the one day they go in, you eat the corn, and you shut the gate, and they're trapped. And so how do you get people to give up their precious freedoms? You get them into fear, or you give them a little free stuff, and they like it. And they want a little bit more, until pretty soon they get dependent upon it. And then you shut the door and say, you want to continue to get this stuff, you've got to give up your freedoms. So the deep state, the big government, will create or capitalize on chaos and discord to create an atmosphere of fear. And then in this, they'll promise a solution of free stuff, but in the process, they'll consolidate power. A couple scripture verses that go along with this is Psalms 131, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And then Proverbs 6 says, lists 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination. And the last is he that soweth discord. So we have unity, we have discord. So the idea is that, patriotism toward one, being one in a country is bad. And so you get people to stop being patriotic, get them to identify with subgroups, and then you pit them against each other to sow this discord. And then you come along promising to restore order. And in the process, you take away their freedom. And we actually saw this in heaven. Imagine being in heaven. It's in heaven. It's wonderful. And then somebody sows discord. His name is Lucifer. Gets a third of the angels to rebel against God. And of course, they're cast down. And now he goes into the garden and he sows discord between Adam and Eve. And there's lots of stories, but I pick out a couple. One is Israel. For the first 400 years out of Egypt, they had no king. They were a republic, the Hebrew republic, and anybody could be raised up into leadership. And one of them was Gideon. And he helps to fight and defeat 100,000 Midianites. So there's no threat to Israel after he defeats these Midianites. There's a whole generation of peace. But he has an illegitimate son named Abimelech who wants to seize power. And so he does identity race politics. Abimelech goes to the town of Shechem and he says, is it better for you that all the sons of Gideon reign over you? Remember also that I am your flesh, your bone and your flesh. I'm one of you. And the brethren spake in the ears of all the men of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. So forget the fact that he can or cannot be good at ruling. He's just one of us. And with that, they went to the treasury and they took money out, and they hired protesters and rioters to commit violence. It says they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baalberith, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and worthless persons, which followed him. And he went into his father's house at Ophrah and slew his brethren. And then the men of Shechem made Abimelech king, right? So he took the power away from the people. He first sowed the discord, created the crises, and then he promised an answer, and they made him king. That would have been the end of the Republic of Israel decades before Saul, had not someone thrown a millstone over a wall and it killed Abimelech. But this is like the first detailed recorded story of someone sowing discord to seize power. And then we fast forward to Italy. So 500 years ago, Italy was a bunch of city-states: Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and they all had armies and navies and fought. And Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of these city-states, it would stop the infighting. So he writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end, because it'll stop all the infighting between these city-states, that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. And of course, Machiavelli is more or less recording the tactics that he sees Caesar Borgia using, who was a corrupt political leader. So the idea is, if a prince wants to conquer a city in his quest to unify Italy, which is a good end because it'll stop the infighting, but that city does not want to be conquered, well, they would hate this prince. But if this prince pays criminals to kill cows, burn barns, smash windows, sort of like Abimelech, hire vain and worthless persons to create all this rabble, the people will feel insecure and they'll get into fear and they'll want someone to come along and fix this mess. And that's when the prince comes in and he says, I can fix it. I just need some emergency powers. And he'll get rid of the very people he bribed to create the crises. No one will know the better for it. And everyone will praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire. Then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher. And they'll pay anything for it and even thank you for being there. So it is called machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on a crisis to consolidate control. You've probably heard that quote a little bit more recently, like this: Rahm Emanuel, Obama's chief of staff, you don't ever want a crisis to go to waste. It's an opportunity to do important things that you would otherwise avoid. Or Hillary Clinton said, I'm actually excited about this opportunity. We are not yet through this crisis, but the chief of staff for President Obama is an old friend of mine and my husband's. And he said, never waste a good crisis. And then Fox Primetime had guest host Ben Domenech, and he said the authoritarian left is using the permanent pandemic to achieve as many ends as they can imagine. This is Rahm Emanuel's famous dictum, never let a crisis go to waste. Normal times don't produce the outcomes that the authoritarian left wants because people are not scared enough to give them the limitless power they crave. Crises are necessary. And so if there aren't any on offer, they manufacture them. So you and I see a crisis. Our response is, how can we help people through it? They see a crisis. Their response is, how can we usurp power through it? All right, same crises. They just have a political, you see it as an opportunity. Well, Henry Louis Mencken wrote in 1956, the urge to save humanity is almost always a false face for the urge to rule it. Power is what all messiahs really seek, not the chance to serve. Ronald Reagan said, one of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism is medicine, a healthcare crisis, right? It's easy to disguise a medical program as a humanitarian project. So the concept is seizing the moral high ground. You may have heard that term. Casinos use it. If a casino wants to come in, and people that are against it will cite statistics of crime going up whenever a casino comes in, money laundering and so forth. But if the casino gives some money to schools, they can seize the moral high ground and say, we care about children. We care about the students. And if you care about children, you should vote to expand casinos. And if you're not voting to expand casinos, you must hate the children. Right? So they've seized the moral high ground. They say they're more caring than you are. And if you don't instantly fold and support their agenda, you're a hateful person. And so what Ronald Reagan is saying, that it's easy to do that with healthcare. So if they want to push their totalitarian plan, people say, no, I don't want to give up my rights. But if they say, we care about people's health more than you do, and if you don't vote to give them more power, you must hate people's. Forget the fact that there are alternative methods, that there are different drugs that have years and decades of use that can get rid of it without buying of an expensive vaccine. And so forget all that. You have to immediately fold and support our agenda, or you're hateful. And so Ronald Reagan says, it's easy to disguise a medical program as a humanitarian project. If you don't stop this, behind it will come other federal programs that will invade every area of freedom until one day we will awake and find we have socialism. So how do you take rights and power away from the people? If they're all happy, they're not going to give it up. So you have to make them get into fear, and they'll give it up, or you get them dependent on free stuff. I thought this cartoon editorial was interesting. It's Daily Caller. It says dangerous new variant, and the two scientists are looking through the microscope, and it says it appears to be mutating into a totalitarian dictatorship. Reagan added, we want no further encroachment on these individual liberties and freedoms. So we talked about Lucifer sowing division and his desire to try to seize power, and then sowing division in the garden, and then Abimelech sowing division so he can seize power, and Machiavelli sowing division so he can seize power, and never let a good crisis go to waste. But a classic is the British Empire. And interrupt me at any time, Al or Alex, if you've got any questions or comments.
I mean, it's really an amazing thing, Bill, what you did. I mean, it's just kind of like it's a smooth flow, and yet I see a lot of comments. People are saying they've never seen it explained this way. It makes a lot of sense, and it's relevant to what we're dealing with right now. I mean, that's exactly what the COVID crisis is all about. I mean, there's a lot of people that are capitalizing on it, not to mention before COVID, but I think COVID has empowered the agenda even beyond what was intended initially. So you can see now more push. And like I said, they use this shaming tactic. Is like, oh, if you don't do this, then shame on you because you don't like the show. I mean, the other day, an anchor, I don't want to mention the name or the station, used exactly that. If parents do not let their children use masks, I mean, they hate children. So, and they're murderers and all kind of stuff like that. So it's just amazing. So, Bill, I mean, can you address at some point, I mean, not necessarily at the moment, but I want you to continue with your flow here. Can you address really what has been some of these experiences in the past in different generations? And did socialism succeed for a while, or did it get stopped sometimes? And what worked against it? Because it seems to me in our situation in the US, it's a generational thing. You have a large group of people who are buying into it because of that free food, but not seeing the hook.
Also, yes. Later,
yes.
After you answer me, I'll have a question also, Bill.
Yeah, well, Lenin said socialism is a transition phase to communism. And Karl Marx says communism can be summed up in one sentence: abolition of private property. So again, how do you get people to give up their private property? Well, they won't do it if everything's fine. So if in a crisis, though, they'll give it up, and you can incrementally, restrict their use of it till pretty soon they don't own it, or tax them to take it away. But I can get more into that. But Alex, did you want to?
Yeah, I had a question, Bill. One of the common questions I get from Christian brothers and sisters who are on the left, they oftentimes will ask me, and I like to ask you the question and see how you would answer it. But Bill, you are Christian. Alex, you are Christian. Al, you are a Christian. Doesn't the book of Acts talk about Christians coming together and owning everything in common? So why are you speaking against socialism when the Bible seems to be saying that we should be owning everything in common?
Yeah, it's the difference between voluntary and involuntary. It seems pretty simple there, but I actually have a presentation that I go into detail on that, and let's see if I have a chance to find that on my computer. I think maybe this one will work. So the Bible gives commands to 5 groups: individuals, families, business, and church and government. And I apologize for going through these slides like this, but let me get on this one here. And now, can you see that? Did I share?
Not yet. We're unable to see it.
Okay. Well, shoot. I don't know if it's gonna. What do you see on the screen there?
We're still seeing the map, so you might want to get out and come back again to that particular slide, and that might work.
Okay, so I'll exit my one presentation, and let's see here. Go ahead next to that. Now, what do you see now?
It's still the map.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna unshare my screen, then reshare it.
Sure.
So let's do that real quick. And share screen.
I'm sorry to get you on a tangent, Bill, but I think it's important for Christians to understand this point.
Yeah. So what do you see now? Nothing.
Yes, we can see now confusion as.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so God gives commands to 5 groups: individuals, families, business, church, and government. The commands to individuals do include taking care of the poor. The commands to the families, though, they don't prioritize that. The commands to the families are: husbands, love your wives, children, submit to your parents, and so forth. There is a command that says take care of your relative or you're worse than an infidel. The business commands are: do an honest day's work, don't hold back wages. There is a command that says leave the gleanings of the field for the poor people to pick through. The church is definitely commanded to take care of the poor, and they immediately did. And they began to feed the orphans and the widows. And then they started the first hospitals, and they started medical clinics, and they had orphanages and all this. Did you know there's no command in the Bible for the government to take care of the poor? The command to the government's the shortest: protect the innocent, punish the guilty. And what's happened is the government has usurped the church and the individual Christian's role primarily. And so when we look at it, James Madison said, charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government. Davy Crockett, there was a woman who had helped some of the founders, and her had a home catch on fire. And so the U.S. Congress was going to, give some money to help her rebuild because they were all appreciative of her. And Davy Crockett, congressman from Tennessee, says Congress has not the power to appropriate this money as an act of charity. Every member on this floor knows it. We have the right as individuals to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity. But as members of Congress, we have no right to appropriate $1 of public money as charity. What's the difference there? you give away your own, you don't give away what is somebody else's. Calvin Coolidge says this: it does not follow that because something ought to be done, the national government ought to do it. Gerald Ford said, people say, why don't you expand that program and spend more federal money? I look them in the eye and say, do you realize that a government big enough to give us everything we want is a government big enough to take from us everything we have? So when the church helps people, it wants the person to be better off so they can help the next needy person, and the body of Christ grows. It's called disinterested benevolence. Whereas the government helps people, it's an exchange for something in return. And we have the ancient Egyptian model where they give grain to the people of Egypt, but in exchange, they take their cattle, their land, their lives, their votes, their control. And then you have someone in the government that is dispensing all the free stuff, and they like their job. And the temptation for them is to give a little more to those that are going to help them stay in power and keep away from those that want to take away the power. And they become discretionary. So when the church helps people, there's no ulterior motive. And the giver has the joy of being used by the Lord. The recipient experiences the love of God through a real person, not from an impersonal, check that comes in the mail. And this person is grateful. When the government helps people, it is always impersonal. And instead of being grateful, the recipient views it as a debt that's owed to them, and they become irate if it's delayed or discontinued. And over time, the recipient loses self-esteem. They see other people working and being successful, and here they are, receiving free stuff, and they want to channel that negative feeling somewhere. And they channel it toward the very entity that's making them feel bad, the very government that's giving them free stuff. They end up hating the government that's giving them free stuff. It's one of these strange human nature dynamics. So, in the Bible, Jesus said the parable of the talents. All right, the one guy has one, then another, 5, and another 10. The one guy multiplies it, doubles it from 5 to 10. The other guy, doubles the 2 one, and then the one person buries his. And it says the master comes home and says, take the talent from the guy that has 1 and give it to the guy that has 10. And the servants say, well, master, he already has 10. And Jesus says, this is the way the kingdom of God is, right? So Jesus didn't say, okay, take from the guy that has 10 and distribute it equally among all 3. No. He says the person that's diligent and hardworking, he gets more. Now, what does he do with the more? He has the opportunity to be charitable. And this is key because it's the difference between free will and not free will. And so the Pilgrims, they originally were a company colony. I mentioned that. And they almost starved to death because nobody wanted to, no ladies wanted to wash some other guy's clothes, and nobody wanted to work. They replaced company with covenant. What's the difference? Involuntary versus voluntary. The idea is that you get rights and blessings from God, and you help take care of your brothers and sisters because you're accountable to God. And God said, whatever you do to the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. And so it's a voluntary thing. And they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard, and goes back to ancient Israel, that first 400 years out of Egypt. And I go through a bunch of things about how ancient Israel was unique when compared to all the other countries. But for the sake of this illustration, I'm just focusing on the idea of voluntary versus involuntary. And I apologize, I've got all these different slides there. It's a really good presentation. And so in the socialism, the idea is that you voluntarily take care of your neighbor. The church, the early church, they sold their property and they laid the money at the feet of who? Pilate, right? The Roman emperor, for the government to redistribute. No. They laid the money at the feet of the apostles. So if you want to be like the early church, give your money to the church leaders and have them give to the poor. You do not give your money to Pilate and have the government take care of the poor. right? If you want to be like the early church, right, and you're not forced. There's no government tax collector coming by and saying, you have to give up this money for us, the government officials, to redistribute to who we think ought to get it. No, it's no force involved. You're blessed with possessions. The Bible talks a lot about charity. Charity is a voluntary thing. And so you voluntarily give some of your possessions to the church leaders, and they voluntarily have feeding programs and support missionaries overseas and dig wells in villages in Africa and, support the Doctors Without Borders giving vaccines down in, Latin America and so forth. It's voluntary versus involuntary. That is a big deal with God. I mean, in a sense, that's the whole reason he made us. Everything God makes follows rules. Laws of planetary motion, laws of gravity, laws of physics, laws of quantum physics, electrons, neutrons, protons, everything follows rules. And then in the world of creatures, they follow instinct, right? The little butterflies and the little, monarchs, the whales, everything follows instinct, except man has the choice as to whether or not to follow God's plan. And so the choice is a big deal. So out of this framework of everything in the universe that God controls, he created this one itsy bitsy little window that he doesn't control, your will. Now, he could control it if he wanted to, but that would defeat the whole purpose of him making us, right? Now, why is that? Because God is love, and he loves you, and he sort of wants you to love him back. He doesn't need your love. He's not insufficient in any way, but he wants it. But love, by definition, must be voluntary. The moment it's forced, it evaporates. The moment God would force you to love him, he himself would know he's forcing you to love him, and he would know that your response is not a true love response. And so he gives you the free will. And so you see, Adam and Eve, they're in the garden, there's the tree, and they get the free will to choose or not, But in the Bible, Moses said, whoever's heart is moved, bring stuff. The gold and the purple thread, to build the tabernacle in the wilderness. It was voluntarily given. And then when David is meeting with the different elders in Israel, he says, I'm going to give, 5,000 talents of gold to set aside for my son, to build the temple. And how much you guys going to give? And they cough up thousands of talents of gold. And then when they go to Babylon and they come back, it says that whoever's heart was willing gave to rebuild the temple. God wants his temple, his house, his church, his kingdom built with voluntary gifts, not forcibly. So the physical world is an opportunity for us to manifest what's spiritually in our hearts. And that's a big deal. So the difference between socialism and the early church is the early church was voluntary, socialism is involuntary. And then I quickly get up to the French Revolution. And they helped us with our revolution, got nothing in return but debt. And then they had a couple of years where the crops failed. And the people of France said, if we could just chop off the king and queen's heads, all of our problems will be solved. And so they chop off the head of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, but it's hadn't turned around. So then they decided to chop off the heads of all the royalty, and it doesn't turn around. Then they chop off the heads of all the wealthy. You have money, we don't. You're selfish, doesn't turn around. Then they chop off the heads of the businessmen and farmers. You got food and supplies, we don't. You're selfish. Then they chop off the heads of the hoarders. You got extra food and we don't have enough. You're greedy. And then they chop off the heads of the clergy because they're speaking out against the head chopping off stuff. Then they chop off the heads of the former revolutionaries. Somehow they're to blame. 30,000 people had their heads chopped off. I mean, they even invented a nice, clean guillotine machine to chop off heads. And the motto of the French Revolution was liberty, equality, fraternity. Fraternity is their word for socialism. The fraternity, the group, the collective, the social contract, right? The mob. And equality can be understood two ways. In America, it was equal treatment before the law. And in France, it was everyone having an equal amount of stuff. And if the fraternity, the group, the collective thinks you have too much stuff, it can take away your stuff, redistribute it, and kill you. Right? So in America, equality is equal treatment before the law. In France, it was everyone having an equal amount of stuff. And anyway, I can go through some more of this. But did that make any sense?
Yes, sir. So Bill, let me ask a question. Some people usually bring this up, whether they truly mean it or maybe they don't understand it. They always bring up, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Somehow in their mind, there has to be a separation between the two. In other words, we, the church, shouldn't be really worried or involved with anything. What would you say about that?
Yeah, it's what that statement that of Jesus was that God was above the government. See, the Caesar claimed to be God. Caesar claimed to be in control of everything. And what Jesus did was draw a circle around Caesar's power and says Caesar's power is limited. It's not, he's not God. There is a power above Caesar, and that's God. And then the Romans didn't have welfare. They didn't have any welfare programs. They didn't have any hospitals. They didn't have any health care. They just had an army. And it was the church that all the way, I have a book I put together called The Miraculous Milestones in Science, Medicine, and Innovation. It was the church that invented hospitals, right? They'd go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and the pilgrims, the travelers, would wind up being worn out. And so they would set up a place in the monastery with an infirmary. And the Latin word for traveler or pilgrim was hosp, H-O-S-P. So they called it a hospital. And then when they began to be attacked, right, when Islam began to expand, they need knights hospitaller. And then there was the plague of Justinian. I think it was in 541 AD. And 15 million people died in Constantinople. And there was St. Samson the Hospitable, and he took in the sick into his house and he doctored them up. And then there was a St. Fabiola in Rome, and she gave her own money and started to go down herself and take care of the poor. And they did that because Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it to me. It wasn't the Roman Empire, right? They didn't do any of that. It was the Christians that started organizations to raise money to ransom people who were in slave trade. And so Vincent de Paul was captured by the Ottoman Turks and made a slave and witnessed to one of the wives of his slave master. And she finally converted, and she pressured the husband, and they let Vincent de Paul go. Goes back to France, and he raises money to ransom people who had been in the Islamic slavery. But then he starts a hospital, and the Queen of France gives him money. And so has an whole order of nuns that take care of the sick. They're called the Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. They start hundreds and hundreds of hospitals all across Europe. Why do I do that? The government didn't start those hospitals, right? It was individuals that were moved upon that collected donations, and wealthy people would give them donations, but others wouldn't. Then the bubonic plague, there's a whole order of Catholic men called Election Brothers, and they would collect the dead bodies and give them a Christian burial. And then it turned into like hospice care, and then the hospitals. And so the idea is you give to Caesar, but Caesar's job was just really simple. Protect the innocent, punish the guilty. That's all government did. Protect the innocent, punish the guilty. The government did not do any of these social programs. What happened is the government has been edging and encroaching on the church's responsibility to take care of the poor. Right? All the universities were started by the church. It was, the University of Bologna, Oxford. These were all started by the church. And anyway, does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Alex, if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I love that answer. Yes, I love how you talked about fraternity in France and socialism and what it means and what it means in the United States, equality, right? Equality under the law. I like how in the US it's equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. So there's a big difference between those two. But one question I have for you, and this may be a hard pill to swallow for many Christians, but since this is the role of the church, right, to take care of those things, how much should we blame the church, us in America, for what we're seeing today? In other words, if it's our role and we've basically given up the role to the state, to take care of the poor and do all those things and feed the needy and the poor and take care of the orphans and the widows, and we see the state doing it, how much should we be blaming ourselves and the church?
Right. So God is a personal God, and He wants to have personal relationships with people. And so you see a step-by-step process to get away from that. So the church would have a benevolence ministry, but then there'd be like a community, and there'd be a number of different churches, and they would be like, hey, why don't we have one pantry? And if we all pitch in a little bit, and then when some person comes by, rather than them hitting up all three of our churches, they'll just go to this pantry and get stuff once, right? And but these churches may have different denominations, and so they'll be like, let's go light on the doctrinal stuff, let's just be a basic Christian Jesus loves you type of thing. That's great, okay. And then more churches get involved, and then they maybe edge away from the Christian gospel message a little more. And then you have the government that comes in and says, well, we want to begin to give money to these charities. And then the government says, well, we want you to sort of tone down on the crosses. Can you just take all those crosses down? And can you take the little tracts and pamphlets out of the lobby? And you're still helping people. And then under President Obama, I actually talked to a pastor in Las Vegas, and he said that President Obama said, well, we're going to set up a government-run pantry, and all the churches have to do is just send people to this pantry, and the government will pay them, and we'll register them as Democrat voters. And we'll even have an assigned Democrat voter benevolence person in every church. And so whenever there's a needy person, they'll see him, and they'll just send him here and sign him up to be Democrat voters. This guy, this pastor, he felt that he was supposed to go to be a part of it, to sort of see how it was all working out. So he integrally saw all this taking place. And then the churches used to go to all the grocery stores and restaurants and collect all their extra food. Well, guess what? This government-run place went to all of these restaurants and these grocery stores and says, we'll take all your extra food and give you a tax receipt. And so all these places that used to give their bakery would give old bread to these kitchens, for the run by the churches, they're like, no, I'm going to give this to this government-run handout place, and I get a tax receipt. And then the churches say, well, we want to keep our benevolence ministry going. And the government place will tell you what, you come to our government place, and we will sell you the food and stuff that you can, stock in your shelves and so forth. And then they begin to make the prices so exorbitant that it doesn't really work that way anymore. And so it's almost like the same, fear and free stuff, that the government comes along and just a little encroachment here, until pretty soon they take it completely away out of the church's responsibility, and then they use it for political purposes.
Yes, thank you. Another question I wanted to ask, it seemed like, Bill, there are some people that somehow are convinced that socialism is actually a good thing for the US. Maybe they have an experience that is based on socialism. Some even bring this idea of liberal fascism versus socialism. What would you say to that? Because, our young generation are paying attention to comments like this, and they think the conservatives or the churchgoers are really against them getting this freedom of having things for free.
Yeah, it shows a lack of history, because whoever controls the purse strings has the power. So if the government is going to be in the position of doling out free stuff, the person in the government doing that likes his job and will be tempted to want to give a little extra free stuff to those that support him in his job. And if there's somebody that is criticizing them, the temptation is to hold off some of that free stuff and be discretionary. Now, that's explaining it very simply. What ends up happening is you have political favors being doled out. and contracts and all kinds of stuff to those that support the people in power. And they don't just hold back benefits from those they don't like. They will use the power of the government to go after and prosecute and drag away and kill. And so you have millions of people that have been killed by government from the people that are in the position. And I use the illustration with Joseph in Egypt. Joseph was a godly man, and he concentrates power into the hands of the Pharaoh. And what did the Pharaoh do with that power? He fed the children of Israel, gave them the best land at Goshen, gave them jobs taking care of his cattle. But then there was a new Pharaoh that did not know Joseph, and he used all the concentrated power to oppress the children of Israel and to make them slaves and to throw their male babies in the Nile River. And so that's the dilemma. You concentrate power because you're a naive person and you say, let's let the government get socialized and everybody's needs will be taken care of. Okay. But then what happens when you get a new Pharaoh that does not know Joseph? And you got somebody that likes their power and doesn't want to be challenged, and they're going to use it oppressively. If they can, they will. If there is a weak spot in the dam, that dam will eventually break. And it's human nature. And let's see if I have some slides. I go through the whole French Revolution and all the killings and how they wanted to get rid of Christian references, and then they ended up getting a Napoleon. So this isn't it.
Bill, just to let you know, you might want to, because we cannot see some of these slides, if you want to do the same thing, unshare and come back again to the slide you want to start from.
All right. And
okay, now I'll share it for you. Give me a second. Yes, sir. You can go ahead.
Okay. Do you see the Puritan Israel covenant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's 4 slides here. We go from the Puritans and who got their idea from ancient Israel, the idea of a covenant with God and with each other. And so that's where you get rights and blessings and things from God, and you share them voluntarily with your neighbor because it's charity, and you do it because you are accountable to God. And whatever you do to the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. Be nice to the stranger because you weren't a stranger in Egypt. The century after the Pilgrims is called the Age of Enlightenment. And covenant turns into social contract. And if there is a God, he's distant. He's uninvolved. He's far removed. This comes out of the scientific revolution in the early 1800s, where you have Isaac Newton discovering laws of gravity, laws of motion, laws of optics, Robert Boyle discovering laws of pressure, Galileo inventing the first astronomer to use a telescope. You have Kepler discovering laws of planetary motion. And so some theologians came up with the idea that maybe God just made everything with laws. And he just, like a guy winds up a clock and sets it on a shelf. It just follows these gears and these laws. And yeah, God's there, but he's distant. He's not involved in our everyday lives. And so that concept, it goes from the Pilgrim idea of a covenant with a very personal God that you're personally getting blessings and rights from and you're personally accountable to, yeah, it's more of just us. And if God's there, he's distant. The century after the Age of Enlightenment is the French Revolution. And social contract with a distant God turns into social contract with no God. It's just what the people agree upon. And you get your rights from the group, you're accountable to the group. And in the next century, it turned into socialism and Marxism, where the state is God. You get your rights from the state, you're accountable to the state. And if the state thinks you're not pulling your weight, the state can kill you. So Hegel, the German professor who taught Karl Marx at the University of Berlin, Hegel said the state is God walking on earth, that we must worship the state. All the worth which the human being possesses, he possesses only through the state. And Rousseau, who wrote The Social Contract, says, when the state says to a citizen, it is expedient for the state that you should die, he ought to die because his life is a gift made conditionally by the state. right? There's no God anymore. It's just the group, what the group agrees upon. And if this group thinks that you're not pulling your weight or you're a threat to it. So in Germany, a century later, you have the National Socialist Workers' Party, Nazi. And the New York Times had the article 1933, Nazi Ministry of Justice authorized physicians to end the sufferings of incurable patients. No life still valuable to the state will be wantonly destroyed. Oh, okay. As long as the state thinks your life is worth something to it, you can live. There's no concept of you are made in the image of the creator and so forth. And then Pol Pot in his Khmer Rouge, the communist takeover of Cambodia, he said, to keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss. It's like, if you help my state, my communist party, then I'll keep you alive. But if you're not, no loss to me. He kills a third of his country. And so we go from Pilgrim covenant under God to the Age of Enlightenment social contract with a distant God, to French Revolution social contract with no God, to socialism where the state is God. Hegel said the state recognizes no authority but its own. It acknowledges no abstract rules of good and bad. What's an abstract rule of good and bad? You mean like the Ten Commandments? Yeah, the state doesn't acknowledge the Ten Commandments. It's just a power grab by the state and the people that are in the state that like to keep their job. That's what we call the deep state. And since there's no God that this state is accountable to, right? If you help the state get more powerful, the state thinks your life is worth something to it. If you don't, or you threaten, or you want to take power away from the state, it will use the state power to crush you. And this is why evolution is always taught before they bring in socialism, because as long as there is a creator and this creator gives individuals rights, then the government's job is to protect and guarantee the individual's rights. But if there's no creator, all there is the state. And Eisenhower put it this way: in many lands, the state claims to be the author of human rights. If the state gives rights, it can and inevitably will take away those rights. People say, well, can we have Christian socialism? That's just New Testament church. Get rid of the word socialism and just say New Testament church. Just get back to believers taking care of people because they're doing as unto God, and the church is going to do whatever organizing needs to be done in disinterested benevolence. Forget the word socialism. Just get everybody saved and just go back to being the New Testament church. Socialism is counterfeit church. It takes away voluntary and makes it involuntary. And it's, instead of it disinterested benevolence, it's the people do it because they have an interest in staying in power. And Eisenhower said the founding fathers had to refer to the creator in order to make their revolutionary experiment make sense. So do your rights come from the government or a source higher than the government? Our founding fathers said their rights come from a source higher than the government, so the government's job is to protect our God-given rights. When they come from the government, it's the collective. So that's the French Revolution motto. Fraternity is liberté, equalité, fraternité. We talked about fraternité being the word for socialism. We talked about equality having two definitions. But liberty is always experienced individually. Fraternity is a collective experience. So who wins out? The collective. The collective says that you have to sacrifice your individual liberty for the sake of the state. That's why the French motto was inside of itself is mutually exclusive, because the individual liberty always ends up being sacrificed for the collective fraternity. Eisenhower says it was because all men are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights that men could dare to be free. We want to be free from the state controlling everybody and involuntarily taking away your stuff and involuntarily deciding that you're not pulling your weight so the state can kill you. And anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bill. That was really enlightening. I want to turn it over to Alex if you have any last minute questions, and then I want to ask Bill one more.
Yes, Bill, I had so many questions, but maybe we'll have you over again, because you're such a wealth of information, and you're such a blessing, an incredible blessing. Thank you, Bill. One of the questions I have, is I was dumbfounded by how Christian the founding fathers were, and they were really, when you listen to President Obama, he said that we're a Muslim nation. There's nothing farther from the truth. I mean, they were Christian. That doesn't mean that they all necessarily believed in all the things in the Bible, but they were Christian, and they were moved by the Holy Spirit, and they understood human nature, and that's the difference with communist regimes or Islamic regimes. They don't understand. One of the starting points is that they don't understand human nature. But the question I have for you is the question that I get asked a lot, and I love your answer on that. Is America a Christian nation? That's a question that we hear oftentimes, and people take one extreme or the other. But I love your answer. If you would please answer that.
Yeah, well, there's 4 different ways in which a country is not Christian. Right now, it's not Christian in the schools, teaching transgendered stuff. Jesus said in the beginning, God made them male and female. And it's not Christian in the courts with Supreme Court deciding for abortion. Jesus was in his mother Mary's womb from the moment of conception, right? So life begins at conception. And so then the government is edging on not being Christian, with them pushing all kinds of things contrary to the Bible. And then the Hollywood and media and education, all right, is moved in a non-Christian direction. But as far as the founding of the country goes, yes, and I have the different ways to explain that. So first is I read through every colonial charter and found out that every colony was started by a different Christian denomination. Virginia was Anglican, Massachusetts was Puritan, Connecticut and New Hampshire were Congregationalist, New York was Dutch Reformed, Delaware and New Jersey were originally Swedish Lutheran, Maryland Catholic, Pennsylvania founded by Quakers. And these different colonies did not get along. They would tar and feather each other. Then they had to work together against the King of England. And after the revolution, their attitude was, we may not always agree on religion, but you were willing to fight and die for my freedom. I need to let you practice your faith. And it was on a state level. So I read through every state constitution. 9 of the original state constitutions required all office holders to be Protestant Christian. North Carolina, New York, Georgia, South Carolina. 3 said all you had to do was be a plain Christian. Like Delaware said every office holder had to make a declaration of belief in God the Father, Jesus Christ, his only Son, the Holy Ghost, one God, blessed forevermore. Think, well, that's pretty narrow-minded. No, that was generous, because by saying Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, you could be any denomination of Protestant and even Catholic. And then you had Maryland said all you had to be a Christian to hold office. That was real liberal, because before then you had to be an Anglican Christian. And then Pennsylvania was a liberal state. Ben Franklin signed its constitution, and it said every office holder had to make a declaration of belief in God, the creator and governor of the universe, the rewarder of the good, the punisher of the wicked, and acknowledge the future state of rewards and punishments, and acknowledge the Old Testament, the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. So to hold office in Pennsylvania, you had to acknowledge the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. Well, that was pretty liberal, because you could be any denomination, a Protestant, Catholic, and even, some borderline new type of, things, and say, I believe the Old and New Testament are given by divine inspiration. Only one state had 0 religious requirements to hold office. It was Rhode Island, founded by Baptists, and they had this idea that if you required someone to be a Christian to hold office, they could say they were, even if they weren't, and that would be hypocritical and not pleasing to God. So just vote for the best Christian person you know. And so these were the original state constitutions. These were the states that ratified the U.S. Constitution. These were the states that ratified the Bill of Rights. And so we'll say, well, the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, yeah, all that was to tie the federal government's hands to keep them from getting involved in state business, right? And but then there's an Irish potato famine, and millions of Irish Catholics come to America, and the Catholic percentage went from 1% to 20% in just a decade. And so many states, after a period of a backlash, changed from requiring you to be a Protestant to just requiring you to be a Christian. So North Carolina, 1835, changed from requiring office holders to be Protestant to just requiring office holders to be Christian. That was in effect in North Carolina up until 1868, when they changed it to say all you had to do was believe in God. So every state expanded religious tolerance at its own speed. For example, Maryland, 1851, they decided to expand it from requiring you to be a Christian to saying, and if the party shall profess to be a Jew, he shall make a declaration of belief in a future state of rewards and punishment. So as of 1851, you could hold office in the state of Maryland if you were a Christian or a Jew. And then in 1864, they said Christian or believing in God. Then 1868, they said all you had to do was believe in God. And so you can track it. And I did. I put it together in a book called The Original 13. And so, what about the First Amendment? Again, First Amendment, as well as the first 10 amendments, were simply handcuffs on the federal government, not the states, not the churches, not the librarians, not the coaches, so they could kneel. When did that happen? That was a 1947 case when the federal government took a religion out of state's jurisdiction. As Everson versus Board of Education, Catholics were getting bus rides, and some of the Protestant states didn't like that, and they brought the lawsuit. And a justice named Hugo Black, former KKK member, but he's the one who took religion out of state's jurisdiction, put it under the federal. And then a couple years later, there was the Washington Ethical Society, 1957, wanted tax exemption as a religious organization. And the IRS said, no, you're an ethical society. They sued the Supreme Court. Hugo Black says ethical culture is now a religion. And then you have a guy named Torcaso in Maryland that wants to be a notary, and he doesn't want to say, so help me God, at the end of his oath. And the state says can't be a notary. He sues, and the Supreme Court says there are new religions which do not acknowledge a supreme being. One of them is secular humanism, calls it a religion. And then there's a draft dodger during Vietnam War, right? Elliot Welsh, and he's an atheist, but he wants to claim religious conscientious objector status. And the Army says, no, you're going. But then the Supreme Court said, no. An atheist is religious. When someone holds beliefs with the same conviction as those that believe in a traditional deity, those beliefs constitute their religion. There was even a case in 2005 where a prisoner in the Wisconsin prison system wanted a room for a non-Bible study, and also wanted male pornography. They wouldn't give it to him. And the state law said that they would only get a room for religious purposes. And the federal judge said atheism is Kaufman's, that was the guy's name, Kaufman's religion. A religion does not need to have a supreme being, right? And so to not prefer one religion over the other, they kick God out. And anyway, I could go on and on, but the founding of the country, and then the institutions are still majority Christian. What are institutions? You having rights that the government can't take away. That's not something that exists. In Islam, a kafir infidel doesn't have rights that the government is forbidden to take away. The government can take away those rights. In Hinduism, if you're in the lowest caste as a Dalit or an untouchable, you don't have the same rights as a Brahmin. If you're in an atheistic country and you're useful to the state, you got more rights than somebody that's not useful to the state or a threat to the ruling power. But in America, you have rights because you're made in the image of the Creator. Whether you're a Muslim male or a Brahmin or useful to the state, you're made in the image of the Creator, and this Creator says there's no respect of persons in judgment. That's an institution. That's a concept that is Christian. And then the idea of checks and balances in our government, that goes back to the Bible, that man is a fallen, selfish creature. And since there's no angels on earth to govern us, you can't set enough committees to watch over committees because all of them can be corrupted. So the idea the founders had was, let's pit them against each other. Let's take the power of ruling, split it into three branches, and have a three-way tug of war. So you have people with fallen, selfish human nature will keep a check on others, keep a check on others, and it'll take this power and divide it up. But that's all based on this premise that man has original sin, that he's a sinful creature. And in that sinful, you contrast it to the French Revolution, where they say, "Oh, man's basically good. He's evolving. He's getting better and better." And so we don't need to have all kinds of checks and balances. And well, it turned into a bloodbath, and then turned into Napoleon seizing power. And and then marriage, a man and a woman, family. That's a Christian institution. It's under attack right now, but for the largest part of our country, that's still the norm. So anyway.
Yeah.
So the founding of it indefinitely has a Christian founding, but I don't know if that answer is helpful or not. But
it is, and I hope to have you back again to maybe talk just about the foundation of the U.S. and maybe the founding fathers and anything related to that. These slides that you were showing, I'm assuming that if people obtain the book, they'll be able to get this same information from the book. Is that a safe assessment?
Yeah. I did a book on socialism, Socialism: The Real History from Plato to the Present, and then another one on the history of Islam. And let's see here if I can find a way to close out some of these things. Let's see here. Stop sharing screen. And can you see me now?
Yes, we can. Yes,
okay.
We can.
Could you see me before, or was it just the slides?
No, we can see you. Yeah, I was controlling everything. No worries.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I'm a control freak, so I was in charge.
No. I appreciate you very much. I'd love to be on again. So the book, and then we also have a flash drive of my presentations that you can get and plug it in, and those have the slides in them as well.
Wonderful. How can people get that? By purchasing the book, or do they purchase the flash drive separately?
It's separately, but my website's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. And then I also have a little email that I send out with history stories that are applicable to what's going on today.
Wonderful. We'll get that info and we'll put it also in the description box.
Those
thank you for
emails.
that.
Those daily emails are awesome. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, brother, thank you so much. It was really a blessing to us and to our show. And I know that people have been positively commenting on this. And I hope that they will take you up on your offer to go to your website, subscribe to the newsletter, and also purchase either the flash drive or the book itself. I think it's timely, more than ever before. And I just want to close this segment by reminding people of the following verse in basically the book of Judges, in Judges chapter 2. I believe it's forgive me. Yes, Judges 2:10. I just want to make sure that I'm reading the right verse. It says, "And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers." Now, speaking about Joshua's generation that came after the first generation that died in the wilderness, it says, "All of that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." And that's really my fear. We have a generation that sadly does not know how the Lord blessed this nation, used wonderful people. Yes, I mean, I was reading comments and people are saying, "Oh, the founding fathers, yeah, they're wonderful, but they still have some sins." Gee, I mean, that's newsflash to me. I didn't know that they were sinless. I mean, that would be amazing if they were all sinless. God can use anyone to fulfill his purposes. We're all sinners. That doesn't mean God is incapable of using us. And he used these amazing founding fathers. And look, because of how God used the founding fathers and the freedom and the democracy that is the foundation of this nation based on biblical principles, a guy like me who wanted to be a jihadi, left Saudi, came here to study and found the Lord. So that's how amazing this can be. And I'm just one of many people who come from Islamic backgrounds and other backgrounds that this freedom have opened the door for us to know Christ. So to say that the founding fathers somehow, because they owned slaves or because they did this or that, somehow now we want to downplay how God used them, I think it's pretty naive, in my humble opinion. In fact, Paul was talking to believers who are slave owners. So let us not be, basically oblivious to that fact. All that to say is this: I ache for this nation. And Bill, I am really concerned for this nation. And yesterday, it was a sad day for me to see 13 young men who were Marines die because of decisions that are absolutely uninformed, and decisions that are going to cost our nation and national security a lot. My son served in the Marines, and he was utterly upset this morning, and I don't blame him for that, because he can see the writings on the wall. So we need to pray for this nation, and we need to pray also for all nations. But the U.S. has been a leading nation when it came to democracy and these biblical principles. And sadly, right now, we are surrendering all of that because we're removing the name of God. And once you remove the name of God, I remember someone saying, take God out of man, and all things are possible.
Yeah.
Last word for you, Alex.
No, I'd like to leave the last words to Bill. Bill, anything you like to say in closing?
Well, it's in times of crisis that people turn to Christ, and that my prayer is that as we go through these different days ahead, that more people will turn to the Lord, and pray the blessings of the Lord be upon all those who have taken time today to watch.
Amen. And again, I promise you, brother, that we would love to have you back again. In fact, multiple times, to talk about just one book at a time or one topic at a time. We don't have to rush it all, because there's a wealth of information here and everybody's been blessed by it. So thank you, Alex, for arranging for this. I know people are going to hear an echo, so I'm going to mute both of you for a second. Thank you, of course, for all of what you are doing, Brother Bill. And we pray, of course, that the Lord will use you in a mighty way. I know the road probably is even tougher right now for you than ever before, because you're going to face a lot of opposition. There isn't a whole lot of people that appreciate what you're saying. But this is a safe platform for you. We welcome you here at any time. Whenever you feel like you would like to share something new, you don't have to wait for me. Just let us know. And we would love to have you here to teach lectures about these topics, share about any books that you're publishing, because we want the masses to be aware of what's out there as resources for them.
Well, thank you very much. Well, God bless
Yes,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, as always.
Please go, all of you go to AmericanMinute.com and subscribe to the newsletter, and then buy Bill's books, because they're just incredible.
Amen. And I want to thank everyone who joined us, of course. I know some people will end up watching it because in some parts of the world it's still midnight or early in the morning, but I think everyone will be blessed by this. Also, a reminder to our viewers and moderators that I will have Apostate Prophet to talk about Afghanistan, the situation over there, at 9 p.m. New York time. So hopefully we'll see you back again today. With that in mind, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brother Bill. Thank you, Alex. This is Al Fadi over and out. God bless. Take